in front of 800 or so of the most senior admirals and generals of the U.S. military. Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth gave one of the most sinister speeches in American history. And much, if not most, of the left liberal democratic media sphere, the punditry class, did not even recognize this. The speech was sinister because Trump and Hegseth were recruiting the U.S. military, the most senior leaders, to their vision of imposing white Christian nationalism on America. The most awful thing about the speech was that, in effect, Trump was declaring war against the inner cities of America. That is to say, when he says inner cities, he means black. He was declaring war against black America, the ultimate white supremacist objective. Well, welcome to Pillar on Politics, and I'm Bob Pillar. This is the channel where we have two fundamental premises. The first is that the Trump MAGA Republican Party is at its core, at its heart, a white Christian nationalist, white supremacist party, and we will see this running amok in the Trump-Hegseth speech to the collected generals and admirals. The second premise is just as important and possibly, in a certain regard, even more important. And that is, all these years after Trump has appeared on the scene politically, the left liberal democratic punditry, the media sphere, still do not realize and understand the extent and the veracity of the first premise. So we will also be seeing that at play in this video as we analyze the Trump-Hegseth speech, which we hold, again, one of the most sinister speeches in American history. White Christian nationalism has four biblically based tenets, of which we're going to look at the first two, which are the most relevant to the Trump-Hegseth speech in front of the generals and admirals. The first is by far the most important, and that is a white Christian nationalist hatred of blacks based on the biblical stories of the curse of Ham, often merged with the mark of Cain. The most insidious white Christian nationalist belief in the curse of Ham is that they hold that blacks are born criminal, blacks are born with evil souls, blacks are born satanic. And if you train your ear, if you know about the curse of Ham, and you listen to the MAGA white Christian nationalist discourse, count how many times you will hear the words evil, criminal, the Democrats are criminal, the Democrats are satanic. This is curse of Ham talk, and it persists to this day. The curse of Ham is the most consequential and destructive biblical story in American history, and Democrats have to finally see this. The second tenet is that women are subservient to men. Men dominate. I like to think of the MAGA Republican Party as a river. It's become a rather mighty river, running through American politics, sweeping much in front of it, including the White House and both houses of Congress. This river is made up of two tributaries. The first tributary is that of white Christian nationalism, white supremacy, and this tributary, which is a big force in American politics, this tributary flows into the Trump tributary. Trump, the visceral anti-black racist and megalomaniac who wants dictatorial power, and he's doing all of this in service to MAGA, so MAGA loves him for this. And the two tributaries are flowing together into a mighty river that is sweeping through American politics. The Trump MAGA Republican Party, with Trump as the white supremacist in chief, and they adore Trump for this. Now that we are armed with the tenets, and particularly the two relevant tenets, the curse of Ham and the dominance of men, let's listen to Pete Hegseth's speech. And the assignment, the task is, with white Christian nationalist MAGA ears, to listen for how these tenets course through his talk.
For too long, we've promoted too many uniformed leaders for the wrong reasons, based on their race, based on gender quotas. Foolish and reckless political leaders set the wrong compass heading, and we lost our way. We became the woke department. But not anymore. As foolish and reckless as the woke department was, those officers were following elected political leadership. An entire generation of generals and admirals were told that they must parrot the insane fallacy that, quote, our diversity is our strength. Of course, we know our unity is our strength.
Let's interject a clip of Trump talking about this and see what he has to say, what his contribution is to the idea of a woke military.
Department of War, we were sitting there. I said, didn't it used to be called the Department of War? And he goes, yes, sir. They changed it like in the early 50s. So we won the First World War. We won the Second World War. We won everything in between and everything before that. We only won. And then we went, in a way, woke. That was probably the first sign of wokeness.
What President Trump is saying is astounding. As I said, Trump is the white supremacist in chief of MAGA, and they love him for it. Although he's talking in rather subdued tones, he is screaming white supremacy. His reference to when the Army turned woke way back when is a reference to President Harry Truman's order to desegregate the Army in 1948, which alienated the white racist Southern Democrats who abandoned the Democratic Party in 1948. What Trump is saying here is that before integration, before blacks were integrated, the Army was successful and won wars, and afterwards it was not successful. It did not win wars, which means he's blaming blacks for the military failures in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. This is amazingly insidious and has gone over the heads of every liberal pundit in the country. So the problem is integration. Let's continue to listen to Pete Hegseth to see what his remedy for that is.
Today, at my direction, each service will ensure that every requirement for every designated combat arms position returns to the highest male standard only. This also means grooming standards. No more beards, long hair, superficial individual expression. We're going to cut our hair, shave our beards, and adhere to standards. Today, at my direction, the era of unprofessional appearance is over. No more beardos. The era of rampant and ridiculous shaving profiles is done.
Well, there was considerable ridicule of this no more beardos, this no beards directive, this clean shaven directive, either you're clean shaven or you're out, is in fact a very insidious directive. It is full of white Christian nationalism, and if you look, and let's look at it and pry out the curse of Ham element in it. This article from Mother Jones put me on the right track. And it turns out that this no shaving, these shaving waivers are a 60-year-old Army policy dating back to the Vietnam War. It was implemented in order to facilitate the recruitment of black troops to serve in Vietnam. It turns out a large number of black men are afflicted by a condition called pseudofolliculitis barbae. Pseudofolliculitis barbae is a real condition, and it's a chronic inflammatory disorder of the skin, and as it says, more frequently affecting men of African and also Asian descent. Shaving is what triggers and can bring on an inflammatory reaction, and it seems that the most surefire, perhaps one of the only ways to stave off this PFB is ceasing to shave. Hence, the Army policy makes 100% sense. These two gentlemen here are telling us, do you realize how many black men you're going to lose? Yes, as this reporter from Mother Jones says, Hegseth knows damn well who he's pushing out. Black troops. The amazing thing about white supremacists is how much effort, how much thought they put into trying to harm or get rid of the people they hate. And that's what we're seeing here. The whole point is that Hegseth and his cronies have come up with a method of getting blacks, forcing blacks out of the military under the guise of enforcing standards. This is as white Christian nationalist as you can get. Here is the hatred of blacks showing itself. It is well worth repeating the following Hegseth quote because it is arguably his most important quote of his speech.
The insane fallacy that, quote, our diversity is our strength. Of course, we know our unity is our strength.
Well, hopefully, my dear viewers, you're starting to see the white Christian nationalist biblical tenets, and you're starting to see the patterns of the discourse. And so what does Pete Hegseth mean by unity is our strength? And I think we can confidently conclude that what he means is a military that is essentially a white Christian nationalist arm and dominated by white males. Well, having heard Pete Hegseth, yeah, it's all there. Anti-black, get rid of the blacks. The diminish the women, get rid of the women. Let's turn ourselves to Donald Trump's part of the speech. Listen. And I'm going to, again, the assignment is to listen for the tenets of white Christian nationalism. And I challenge the viewers of this video to, again, don't put on left liberal democratic ears. Listen with MAGA ears. Do you hear the refrains of the curse of Ham throughout what Trump is saying? The curse saying the belief that blacks are born criminal and have evil souls.
Fire department. I always put the fire department in because they're great. They're great. And I got 95% of their vote, too. That helps. When you get 95% of their vote, you always have to mention them. But they're great. And they're brave in our inner cities, which we're going to be talking about, because it's a big part of war now. It's a big part of war. But the firemen go up in ladders, and you have people shooting at them while they're up in ladders. I don't even know if anybody heard that. And I said, don't talk about it much, but I think you have to. Our firemen are incredible. They're up in one of these ladders that goes way up to the sky, rescuing people, and you have animals shooting at them. We haven't had a crime in Washington in so long because we got the careers. We call them the careers. We got these lunatics out, and they'll never be any good. You know, I hate to tell this to the liberal media. You could spend time with them. You could do whatever you want. You could send them to the finer schools, which they couldn't get into anyway, mentally. They couldn't get in, but no matter what you do, they'll never be good. They're bad. They're career criminals. I don't know, maybe they were born that way. Some people don't like me to say that, but maybe they were. Certainly some were. But I want to salute every service member who has helped us carry out this critical mission. It's really a very important mission. And I told Pete we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military. San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. They're very unsafe places, and we're going to straighten them out one by one. And this is going to be a major part for some of the people in this room. That's a war, too. It's a war from within.
I hope that you've picked up that Trump is essentially declaring war on certain American cities, on certain communities, which add up to his declaration of war against Black America. Well, now that we've watched the Trump and Hegseth speeches, and now that we've heard how the white Christian nationalist, white supremacist themes are coursing, are pulsing through it, let's look at some of the reaction to it. The first one I've chosen, okay, he's not necessarily a political pundit. He is a geopolitical consultant, and he says some interesting things. It's Peter Zeihan. He has 900,000 subscribers on YouTube, and he does say some interesting things, and I do listen to his videos relatively often, actually. So let's hear what he has to say about the Trump-Hegseth performance.
Hey, Al, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from Colorado. Honestly, it reminded me of Gaddafi of Libya or Fidel Castro of Cuba in their later decades when they would stand in front of an audience just blah, 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 blah about nothing. I was originally very much dreading this speech. I was expecting perhaps a really dark turn in American foreign and strategic policy. Luckily, we did not see that, which does not mean that there was anything that happened in the speech that makes me feel good. That sense of dread I was feeling is no longer there. Pete Hegseth, most of his speech was spent on the culture war. He made it very clear that any sort of protection protections that existed for any sort of group, whether it's women or blacks or whatever. They were all going away. The physical requirements for anyone who is in a combat role will be based on men, which basically will exclude 80 to 90% of women who were already serving from continuing if these policies are instituted. One item that did perk people's ears up is when the president said that he was considering using American cities as proving grounds for the U.S. military.
So, Mr. Zion, in fact, is fairly dismissive of the whole thing. He called it a lot of blah, blah, blah about nothing. He also said that he was fearing there would be a dark turn in American foreign policy, but somehow he didn't, even though he said he didn't like what he was hearing, he did not pick up the extremely dark turn in American domestic politics and policy. He did talk about Hegseth giving a speech on the culture wars, but the penny didn't drop for Zion that this was the white Christian nationalist agenda being rolled out in front of the military leadership, the military officer corps. It's a matter of connecting dots. Peter is getting some of the dots out there, but he's not connecting them. Our next piece will be from Robert Reich. Robert Reich, he was Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton and for a number of years was a professor out at the University of California at Berkeley. And he's been a very prolific, very progressive, left liberal commentator on Substack, on YouTube. His YouTube channel has 1.36 million followers, and he's a leading light of the progressive wing. So let's see what Robert Reich had to say. So Robert Reich posted this, and basically, to some extent, accurately described what the talk was all about, and saying that Hegseth delivered a diatribe against political correctness, beards, fat generals, and women in combat missions. But he's not realizing that this is the white Christian nationalist agenda. Further, he says that Trump gave a long, rambling, incoherent mess of a speech. And he says it was unlikely that the military were summoned for this. So, what was the real purpose? We don't know, Reich says. Oh my goodness, Professor Reich. You don't know? This is the best you can say? You set yourself up as a pundit. You even take money for your Substack subscriptions. I give you money for a Substack subscriptions, and you're telling me you don't know all these years after Trump came down that escalator and planted himself into American politics, and you're still saying you don't know? You're missing the complete white Christian nationalist agenda in this. You don't even see it. You don't even realize that Trump is declaring war on American inner cities and therefore black America. Completely, absolutely unacceptable. And this is why Trump is getting away with it, because Democrats still can't see it. Start seeing it. The final piece that we'll consider is from Democracy Now!, also a rather left liberal part of the media sphere, with the anchor person Amy Goodman, who was interviewing a Yale Law School professor, Professor Fidel. So let's listen in.
We're joined now by Eugene Fidel, senior research scholar at Yale Law School, where he teaches military justice. He co-wrote a piece for The Hill headlined, "Trump and Hegseth Want to Turn the Military into a Tool of Personal Loyalty." He's an expert on military law, served as a judge advocate in the U.S. Coast Guard. Eugene Fidel, thanks for joining us. Explain what you mean as people describe this unprecedented gathering, where it is many of these generals and admirals were asking why they had to be flown in. This was live streamed. What was the point of this?
I think really the reason for this unusual event at Quantico is probably not that hard to figure out. It's the greatest of all photo ops. We're all used to photo ops, President Trump with police chiefs as the backdrop, GIs with the backdrop. We've seen them in prior administrations. If you remember the mission accomplished photo op that President George W. Bush offered us wrongly. So I think the photo op stands out as an important factor. Second, it's a way of maybe subliminally, but not so subliminally, exacting loyalty, special loyalty from the most senior officers and enlisted personnel in the U.S. Armed Forces.
Professor Fidel, Yale Law School, the best he can offer, the first reason he gives that this was a fantastic photo op. Oh, yes, he got to the point that it was about eliciting military loyalty to Trump and Hegseth for the MAGA Christian nationalist agenda, but he doesn't even recognize the agenda. Do you have to bring a Yale Law School professor to tell you that this was a photo op? I mean, that's probably the most pathetic analysis and assessment I have ever heard. I mean, it's just, quite honestly, it's outrageous. Given what's going on in the States, absolutely out of photo op. Photo op. As I maintain, a fairly substantial part of the left liberal democratic media sphere are clueless, absolutely clueless, have no idea that this was one of the most sinister speeches in American history. And because of their failure to do so, millions, tens of millions of Democrats still have not figured out what the agenda is of the Trump MAGA administration. I have presented my view that Trump-Hegseth speech in front of all these military officers was the most sinister speech in American history, certainly the most sinister in recent American history, announcing the white Christian nationalist agenda and Trump announcing essentially a declaration of war against Black America. I'd like to think this is a rather compelling viewpoint, but let me know in the comments if you agree or not. So, thank you for watching the video. There will be more to come. This is Bob Pillar from Pillar on Politics saying take care.